Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the Luffy Fanfics, back with the amazing fanfiction. This is the series of What If Luffy Ate Icy-Mag Devil Fruit and Smash Grand Line. Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Luffy realized that he was the last member of his crew. He was alone and kneeling before Sakazuki. He couldn't focus on any other fact. It shouldn't have ended up this way, but it had. He should have been able to protect his nakama, but he couldn't. Now, none of his crew would ever reach their dreams, all because they had helped him try to achieve his own. They had given everything, and in the end, it hadn't been enough. Looking around the island, the devastation was evident. You would never guess that this island was once peaceful and filled with happy villagers. Now there was only lava and the overbearing stench of death. He and Sakazuki were located on one of the few patches of ground untouched by his powers. Looking out to sea, Luffy could see the burning remains of Sunny slowly sinking into the murky depths of the ocean. Of his nakama, there was no trace. They had been purged from the earth just as the villagers and the marines had been. There were only two living beings on this island, himself and Sakazuki. He looked up at the monster currently oozing magma that had brought about the end of his nakama. Sakazuki had taken everything from him. First his brother all those years ago, and now he had killed all of his nakama. As Luffy observed Sakazuki, he looked at all the injuries that he had received in their battle, the most scaring of which was the vertical slash down the left side of his face. Zoro had given him that wound just like he had received during his training with Mihawk. But other than that, Sakazuki just looked weary with minor gashes to clothes and any parts of his body that weren't currently molten. Luffy was too broken to continue fighting. With his nakama on the line, he would have kept fighting until he could no longer draw breath no matter how outclassed Luffy was. But he didn't have any nakama to fight for anymore. Sakazuki had won. The Marines had won. Sakazuki knew this just as Luffy knew this. Luffy focused on his face. He had a malicious look in his eye accompanied by a triumphant smirk. It was not the face of a man whose actions weighed heavily upon his soul. With labored breath, Sakazuki let out a cruel laugh. "You have lost, Straw Hat," Sakazuki rasped out. He honestly appeared to be just as injured as Luffy was. Unlike Luffy, however, he hadn't lost anyone he cared about that day. All the Marines there had given their lives to help end piracy, and thus had died righteously. So he raised his right fist, the same one that had ended Ace's life would now end his brother's. Bathed in magma, he prepared to finish Luffy, and he was ready to die. However, Luffy would not die today. Instead, as Luffy looked at Sakazuki's face, he noticed surprise cross it. Luffy had no time to think about what had caused this change before a hand grasping something burst out of Sakazuki's chest. His heart was held within its grasp. Luffy saw that Sakazuki's face was frozen in surprise as the life drained from his eyes. Sakazuki slumped to the ground as the figure's hand slipped out of his chest holding his heart. Luffy had survived. Luffy, however, did not want to survive. Tears began to form at the corners of his eyes as he looked at the mysterious figure and gave him a confused look. The character met his gaze but didn't say anything at first. Luffy got his first chance to observe the newcomer. He was dressed almost entirely in black. His suit, shoes, and even his tie were a solid black. His shirt was red as the blood that stained his hand. He also had neatly cut hair as black as his clothes. But the man himself was pale, disturbingly so. If Luffy looked hard enough, he could swear he could see the man's skull through his near-translucent skin. The man gave Luffy a strange smile. Not a hostile one, but it still unnerved Luffy. "I must admit I am appalled at your manners," said the man with a smirk. "I would think that you owe me thanks for saving your life." Luffy asked, "Why did you stop him from killing me?" The man's grin grew even wider. "Well, I would think that the answer to that question would be quite obvious." He started to look away, a bored expression replacing the grin. "But if I actually need to spell it out for you, I suppose I will." The man leaned down and put his face right in front of Luffy's. His grin came back, nearly splitting his face in two. "The reason I saved you is that this isn't the way I want your story to end." Luffy was surprised as he was confused. He wasn't quite sure how to respond. The man didn't seem too keen to offer any more answers though until Luffy spoke again. "What do you mean my story? My nakama are dead, and I can't keep going knowing I wasn't strong enough to protect them." The man let out a snicker. "But that is exactly why I helped you, don't you see? I didn't want it to end this way, so I'm giving you some assistance." Standing up, the strange man continued speaking. "I know you are all broken up about the death of your nakama, but what if I said I could make all this just a bad dream?" Luffy disliked the mocking tone the man had taken, but what he seemed to be proposing was something Luffy desperately needed. "Could you bring them back?" At this, the man laughed. "Well, of course not. Who do you think I am, a god? No, what I offer is a deal. Not to bring them back, but instead allow you to change the past and make sure that this," he gestured to the hellish landscape around them, "never happens." Luffy realized he really only had one choice. Even if he didn't like or trust the man in front of him, he needed his nakama and thus was willing to do whatever it took to get them back. What do you need me to do? At this, the man's grin grew once again. Well, that's quite simple. You just need to accept the power I give you and from now on keep things interesting for me. I already saw what happened, so I want to see something new. Catch my drift? Luffy seemed to understand what the man was saying. You want me to change the past ... to entertain you? The man laughed. Yes, you do understand. That's great. However, back to that other condition. The power I want to give you is superior to your gum fruit. Luffy was intrigued at this but let the man continue. In fact, it is a devil fruit of my own making. Well, sort of my own making. I had some help from our heartless Nakama there. He said this while gesturing towards Sakazuki. And one other man, yet I can't seem to recall his name. But that is not important. With this, he held out his still bloody hand. The hand which used to contain a heart now carried a devil fruit. One with the classic swirls that were on many devil fruit, but this one was multicolored, featuring both dark red and light blue swirls. What I have here in my hand is the Icy-Mag Fruit. When I ripped the heart from Sakazuki, I also removed the devil fruit within him, combining his Mag Fruit with another's Icy Fruit. Luffy began to think back to when he had seen an ice-type devil fruit and quickly realized who it had come from. You killed Kyuzen, didn't you? Was that his name? Well, no matter, he's dead and now you have a choice. Do you take the Icy-Mag Fruit and continue your adventure, or do you choose to live your life as if we never crossed paths? Luffy, without thinking twice, reached out and took the fruit. Before Luffy could react, however, the man plunged his still bloody hand into Luffy's chest. Luffy was motionless and couldn't feel the hand that should currently be squirming around in his insides. The man laughed. Oh, before I forget, I have to, remove your previous devil fruit if you want the new one. While I did kill the others, I'm pretty sure I can do it without killing you. Maybe. However, it will most likely be excruciatingly painful. The man began pulling his hand out. Luffy had never experienced pain quite like this. It was as if the man was ripping him apart at the seams. He screamed as the man kept pulling and pulling something from within Luffy's chest. As the man's hand slid out of his chest, the very same fruit he had eaten as a child came out with it. He was now holding up the gum fruit as if it had never been consumed all those years ago. Well, as pleasant as your company has been, I'm afraid our time together is drawing to a close. You can keep the gum fruit, for I have no need for it. I'd recommend giving it to one of your recently deceased Nakama, but from here on out what you do is entirely up to you. Luffy, still reeling from the pain, started to consume the new devil fruit, and just like when he was a kid, grimaced at the terrible taste. Once he finished, he took his old devil fruit out of the man's hand. So Luffy, are you ready for your new adventure? Luffy nodded his head in acceptance, and as the man reached forward with 2 fingers towards him, Luffy asked one question: who are you? The man grinned but said nothing as he touched his fingers to Luffy's head and the world went black. The next thing Luffy experienced was an incredibly bright flash of light and the sensation that he was falling. After that, he noticed he was surprisingly high up in the air. Luffy thought to himself, where exactly did that strange guy send me and when? He saw a burnt-up bird and what seemed to be a dispersing explosion of some kind. This did bring back some memories, but he couldn't quite recall why. Luffy started to focus on the ground that was rapidly approaching. All he could see was some town, but it didn't really have anything to set itself apart from any other town he had visited, so that didn't help him any. But as he came closer and closer to the ground, he saw an orange-haired woman running from 3 large-looking men. Now, this definitely seemed familiar, but he didn't have any time to give this any more thought as he hit the ground with a loud crash. Groaning, Luffy began to stand up. It occurred to him that this crash actually hurt, which was odd because he'd never been bothered by blunt damage before. Then it hit him. He was no longer a rubber man, he was instead a frozen magma man. He'd have to come up with a cooler name than that, but it looks like the men in front of him were getting over their surprise. Hey, who the hell are you? And how'd a punk like you survive that kind of fall? The one with the scars all across his head demanded. Before Luffy could respond, a woman's voice spoke up from behind him. Boss, you came to save me. He knew that voice. Turning around, he saw a woman that just a few hours before had been murdered before his very eyes. Nami, Luffy mumbled aloud. The future navigator of the Straw Hat Pirates seemed perturbed at first that a random man who mere seconds before had fallen out of the sky knew her name. But she didn't have much time to dwell on this. She had to get out of there now that she had the map. She didn't have time to waste. She took off with a shout of, sorry, but they're all yours now. And then she was soon running into the distance. But Luffy knew where he was now. This was the town that he had first faced down Buggy the Clown and when Nami had become his navigator. So you're that girl's boss, eh? Well, too bad, cause now you've got to. He didn't even get to finish his sentence before Luffy turned and sent a small wave of Conqueror's Haki his way, immediately knocking all 3 men unconscious. Luffy heard a quiet, what the hell? From up on the roof of one of the nearby buildings. What did you do to those guys? You didn't even touch them. Thinking to herself, just who is this guy and why does he know my name? Oh well, I used what is called Conqueror's Haki. It allows me to knock people of weak will unconscious, Luffy said. Holy shit, this guy might be incredibly strong. I wonder if I can use him to get some of that clown bastard's treasure, Nami thought. She shouted down to the strange man, hey look, you seem tough, and I could use your help. Wanna team up with me? Luffy didn't respond at first. He merely watched Nami. It was weird seeing her. It made him realize just how much she had changed over those 2 years apart. He realized Nami was looking at him oddly now, and it hit him. Oh man, how long have I been staring at her? Sure, I'll team up with you, but first. And at this moment his stomach rumbled in hunger. Nami heard and laughed to herself. Let me guess, you want some food, right? Luffy gave a start to this. Wow, how'd you guess that? Nami's sweat dropped at this. The guy didn't appear all that bright. Oh well, she didn't need smart right now, just someone strong. Never mind about that, let's just get you some food. So she jumped down from the roof and led the man to one of the unoccupied houses. Nami prepared a sandwich for her new partner in crime. While she was doing this, she decided to try and get to know a little bit about this man. From what she had seen, he seemed pretty tough. He must have been around 6 feet tall with broad shoulders. The guy also had this massive scar across his chest in the shape of an X. He was wearing a red shirt that he kept unbuttoned, as well as shorts and a yellow sash fastened around his waist. He was also wearing a straw hat held by a cord wrapped around his neck. She wasn't sure why he seemed to know her name, but she decided to figure this out later. So who exactly are you and how strong are you? Luffy thought about this for a second. How much could he really tell her? He definitely couldn't let too much slip, or she'd probably think he was crazy. So he figured vague answers would do for now. Well, the name is Monkey D. Luffy, and I am pretty strong, I guess. Nami nodded at this and decided to introduce herself as well, pretending she hadn't heard him earlier when he said her name. Well, my name is Nami, and I am a thief who steals from pirates. So is that why those guys came after you earlier? You don't seem to have any treasure on you, so what, you steal from them? Well, I stole a map of the Grand Line from them. I need it if I'm going to achieve my goal. Luffy's face softened at this. He remembered the hardship she had been through and was saddened that she was still suffering under it. But this was going to be another chance to give a severe beatdown to Arlong. So he asked, what is your goal then? I need to earn 100 million berries, no matter what it takes, Nami said with a look of determination on her face. So that's your goal, but why exactly do you need so much? It's none of your business, she said while turning around. Okay, I suppose since you told me your goal, I'll tell you mine. Luffy had an idea that might help in dealing with Arlong. Nami seemed interested in this and turned her head over her shoulder, looking back at Luffy. Oh, so what is your goal? I wanted to test my strength before heading to the Grand Line, Luffy said, and could see it surprised Nami a little. Oh, how do you plan on doing that? Nami asked, curious about his answer. There are a few strong bad guys that I figure if I can take them down I should be more than ready for the Grand Line, Luffy said. I already took one down, a marine captain named Morgan. And there is another on this island called Buggy the Clown. Nami was surprised to hear that. He took down Captain Morgan. She now knew who had likely interrupted her burglary of the captain's base. Maybe he recognizes me from that. Although I still don't know how he would have learned my name, Nami thought as she pondered what it could mean. Why do you want to go to the Grand Line then? And why do you feel the need to fight all these bad guys before you do? Nami asked. Luffy scratched his chin, thinking of the best way to answer that. I figured that if I'm going to be leaving East Blue, I could at least take down some serious bad guys before I go. After all, this sea is where I grew up, and it wouldn't feel right to leave them at their mercy while I move on, Luffy said, carefully choosing his words. I also figured that if I can take all this ocean can throw at me, then I should be more than ready for the Grand Line. Captain Morgan, Buggy the Clown, and Arlong being some that I wanted to bring down the most, Luffy said, watching Nami's reaction to the last named pirate. Arlong, Nami said before calming herself. I've heard of him. What makes you think you're strong enough to defeat a monster like that? She said, attempting to sound uninterested. Cause I've defeated stronger monsters than him, and for less reason, Luffy said, giving a broad grin to Nami. Nami wasn't sure what to think of this man before her anymore. He certainly must have been strong to just knock those men out with that haki of his, whatever that was. But was he powerful enough to defeat someone like Arlong? So she said, prove it. Would you want me to go fight Arlong right now? I don't really know how to get to him from here. I'd need a navigator for that, Luffy said. No, what I want you to do is why I initially wanted to team up with you, although I was planning on you being a diversion, Nami said, rethinking her earlier plan of turning in her boss to Buggy. What do you mean, Nami? Well, if you can defeat Buggy and all his crew single-handed, I might just believe that you can defeat someone like Arlong, Nami said to Luffy. If you can manage that much, then I will agree to be your navigator on a temporary basis. Luffy shoved the remaining amount of food in his mouth and quickly swallowed. Okay, sounds easy enough. Do you know where they are hiding out? Well, I can take you to them, but don't expect any help from me if you get overwhelmed. And with that, they left the abandoned house and made their way to Buggy's campsite. People say he has a devil fruit power, and that's going to make him tough to beat, Nami said to Luffy. While this was a test for him, she did hope that he knew what he was getting himself into. Oh yeah, well, that doesn't scare me. Buggy's not the only one with a devil fruit power. Wait, you have a devil fruit power? How come you never mentioned that earlier? What can you do? Nami had stopped leading Luffy and was keen to see what his power was. Oh yeah, I do. And I didn't say something about it because you never asked. Well, I could show you, but to be honest, I've never used it before, so give me a second to try and figure out how it works. At this, Nami face faulted he has a devil fruit power, but has never once used it. Luffy closed his eyes and tried to focus on the new powers he should have. Deep within himself, he began to feel two sources of energy. One was made up of frigid cold and the other a blazing heat. He tried drawing from both, and he could feel the power welling up inside him. Opening his eyes, he looked down at his hands and began channeling his powers to both his arms. In his right, he focused the heat, and in his left, the cold. Before his very eyes, his left arm completely froze over, but it didn't hurt, and the cold was almost welcoming. Looking to his right, he could see it was formed out of magma, and drops of the molten substance fell off his arm, boring into the stones that made up the road. Looking back at Nami, he couldn't help but smirk, noticing her surprised look. Do you have two devil fruits? Nami asked, unable to peel her eyes from his two elemental arms. No, it's just one. I ate the Icy-Mag Fruit, which gives me control over both magma and ice. I am a frozen magma man, I guess. Nami couldn't believe it. Who exactly was this man? For the first time, she began to seriously consider if he might be strong enough to take Arlong down. I'm sort of new to this devil fruit, but it's a Loja type, if you know what that means. Nami shook her head at this, so Luffy began to explain. Well, it means that my body can make up two elements at will, so things like bullets, blades, and fists will have no effect on me. Well, unless they are powered up by Haki, but no one in the East Blue should be able to use that. Wait, Haki is that ability you used before, right? So if people don't have Haki, they basically can't hurt you. Nami was extremely surprised at this. She had never seen Arlong use any kind of power like that. If that was true, did that mean Arlong couldn't hurt him? Well, there are ways. I mean, if I am touching sea water or sea prism stone, my powers would go away. Although if I'm fast enough, I might be able to freeze the water if I fell in. Also, people with powers more elemental in nature could be able to affect me depending on what they are. Although I think I have to train for me to change form on reflex, so I have to be aware of an attack to negate it. Luffy said, pondering the weaknesses of his new Loja. Okay, so he isn't immortal, but still, he might actually be able to kick Arlong's ass. Could her goal be closer to hand than she thought? She could stop working towards paying him and instead focus on her dream. Well, he still has to defeat Buggy. If he can't do that, there's no way he could fight someone like Arlong. She did think it was interesting that this guy seemed comfortable enough to list off all of his weaknesses. Not that she would probably be able to take advantage of any of them, considering she had never even heard of Sea Prism Stone or Haki before. Alright, well, that's good to know. But you have to defeat Buggy before I even consider being your navigator. Even if she was trying to sound skeptical, she couldn't help but actually start hoping that she had found someone strong enough to end Arlong's abuse. At that, Luffy laughed. Alright, well, lead the way and I'll kick his ass. So the two set off again towards their destination. The pair encountered a familiar face on their way, or at least familiar to Luffy. Hey, Zoro, I see you finally caught up with me. What took you so long? Luffy said with a stupid grin on his face. Zoro looked annoyed for a second and seemed on the verge of yelling at his captain, most likely for being kidnapped by a bird. But once he got a look at his captain, he realized something was wrong. Luffy, what the hell happened to you? Why do you look so different? Luffy, confused at first, was about to ask what he meant when he looked down, and it suddenly dawned on him. He still looked exactly the same as he did before he traveled back in time. To Zoro, it must seem like he suddenly aged, grown larger, and changed clothes. Thinking on that, he supposed according to this time he had done just that. How was he going to explain this to Zoro? Wait, Luffy, you know this guy. But he's the pirate hunter, right? What are you doing with him? Nami asked, confused at why Luffy would know a pirate hunter. What's the deal with Luffy's looks? She thought to herself. Yeah, he used to be a pirate hunter, but I helped him out. And in return, he became my first mate. Luffy said, looking proud of himself. Zoro, still giving his captain a sideways look, confirmed this. Yeah, but Luffy, you still haven't answered my question. You look older. What's going on with that? Zoro was staring intently at his captain. And Nami herself looked to see what Luffy's explanation was. The fact that he knew her name when they first met came to the forefront of her mind again. Who exactly is this guy? She found herself wondering still. Luffy was visibly sweating at this point. He wasn't sure what to say. So not knowing what else to tell, Luffy asked, "Oh, would you mind waiting for that explanation while we go kick some pirate ass?" Zoro simply nodded and said, "Sounds good to me," taking off in the opposite direction that Nami and Luffy had initially been heading in. Nami was confused at this and shouted, "Where do you think you're headed?" "The pirates are this way," while pointing further down the street. Zoro simply stopped, turned around, and started heading the right direction, letting out a simple "oh." Nami face faulted at this. What was he just going to take off in a random direction until he ran into pirates? And why the hell was he not more concerned about the apparent transformation of his captain? Nami certainly wanted to hear his explanation, but with nothing else to really say started heading in the same direction as Zoro with Luffy following close behind. The three eventually came across a broad platform overlooking the area. At the top, you could see a tent and a giant cannon currently hanging over the edge pointed at some of the abandoned houses. At least Nami hoped they were all abandoned, because a second later a resounding boom sounded out and suddenly a long row of houses was suddenly leveled in the blink of an eye. Alright, Nami, so do you want me to defeat these guys by myself, or do you mind if Zoro takes a couple? Nami thought about this for a second but then decided that Luffy should take them all down by himself. After all, if he wants to fight Arlong, this should be a piece of cake. Well, the deal was for you to fight them, so you should just take them on while we watch. Sounds good to me. And with that, the three split up, with Luffy heading to the roof of the building with the tent and Zoro and Nami heading to one of the roofs of the other buildings. So Zoro, can you tell me a little about Luffy? How long has it been since you've seen him if he has changed so drastically? Nami figured if she wasn't going to get any answers from Luffy, then maybe Zoro could tell her something about him. Well, the last time I saw him was a little more than a few hours ago, which is why this change kind of disturbs me. But I guess, well, the kid's a moron, but he's got guts and he's pretty strong, especially with that devil fruit of his. Wait, you've seen his devil fruit? He told me that was something new. When he showed me, he had to figure out how to use it. Nami looked to Zoro expectantly. What do you mean he had to figure it out? He seemed to pretty much have his rubber powers down when I saw him grab hold of that giant bird a few thousand feet above his head. Zoro was confused at her question. He guessed he had never asked exactly when Luffy got his powers. But with the way Luffy handled them, Zoro never thought they were anything new to him. What do you mean by rubber powers? I was told he had eaten the Icy-Mag Fruit. I saw him with magma dripping down his arm as the other one was made completely of ice. At this, Zoro's eyes widened. Magma and ice. Those weren't the powers he had seen before. And they certainly sounded like devil fruit powers. Did he have more than one devil fruit? But that was supposed to be impossible. Zoro looked towards the opposite roof where he could see Luffy's form nearing the tent. He didn't know what was going on anymore, but he certainly knew one thing. Luffy certainly got some explaining to do. Both Nami and Zoro thought simultaneously. Luffy made his way to the roof and was now approaching the tent of Buggy the Clown. It seemed something was happening near where Buggy should have been, because all of his crew were surrounding the entrance. So what you are telling me is that you three not only let that thief get away, but you were also all knocked unconscious from a man who fell from the sky. Do you take me for a fool? Of course not, Captain Buggy. We'd never take for you for a clown. I mean fool, one of the men in the center shouted. Buggy was silent for a second, but so was everyone else, as no one dared utter a word. Did you just call me a clown? Prepared to die, Flaws? Before Buggy could finish his sentence, he was interrupted by a loud "Hey, Big Nose, get out here so I can kick your ass." An even greater silence was met at this. None of the Buggy pirates could believe what had just been said. An opening was created in the group so Buggy could see the offender. After a short silence where no one moved, Buggy began to laugh ominously. The crew grew uneasily at this. There was no way this was going to end well. You three, today is your lucky day. If you kill this guy, I will forgive your pathetic failures, and I might just forgive the insult. The three men looked towards the guy that dared insult their captain and were suddenly horror-struck to learn that it was that man. But Buggy, this is the guy that knocked us out before. We were no match for him. I won't repeat myself, either he dies, or all of you die, Buggy said, staring the three down. So the three warily started making their way to the man with the straw hat. However, as they grew near, Luffy began to use his devil fruit powers, much to the terror of the three advancing on him. Luffy, using his ice powers, began to freeze the ground he walked on, which spread across the battlefield. This caused the advancing pirates to slip up and fall as the rest tried their best to remain standing. Then Luffy used his Conqueror's Haki to knock out the weak-willed pirates, and just as before, the Buggy pirates collapsed to the ground unconscious. This left only two standing on the ice. Luffy and Buggy were the only two conscious left after Luffy's assault. Buggy's eyes widened at this. If he wasn't mistaken, that was Conqueror's Haki, but there are only two men he had seen to ever display that power. Of those two, only one was alive, and he hadn't seen that man for a long time. Not just that, but that ice ability had to be a devil fruit. But what kind was it? If it was a Loja, Buggy wasn't sure he could counter that. Who the hell are you, kid? And how do you have Conqueror's Haki? Buggy wasn't sure what he should do about the kid. On the one hand, he had made fun of his nose and knocked his men unconscious. For that, he wanted to kill him. However, this kid could also be a powerful ally. He seemed to be alone, so maybe he was looking for a crew to join up with. My name is Monkey D. Luffy, and I'm going to be king of the pirates, Luffy said while standing defiantly in front of Buggy. Oh, and I'm going to kick your ass. Never mind, I'm going to have to kill this guy, Buggy thought. The kid was too ambitious and a moron on top of it. Alright, Straw Hat, how about this instead? I kill you, and then I'll be the one finding One Piece. Luffy figured it was time to end this. Focusing his ice powers once again, he created a pillar behind Buggy that launched him towards Luffy. He powered up one of his arms with Haki, and with speed the clown couldn't follow, punched him with enough force to knock the pirate out, instantly sending him crashing back to the ground. Well, better get back to my crew then. After dusting himself off, he started heading off to where Nami and Zoro should be while dragging Buggy along with him. They chose to meet him halfway back in the town's streets. Both of them had been shocked at what they had just watched take place. Luffy had managed to take down the entire crew with an ease that seemed inhuman. Luffy, how did you knock all those guys unconscious? Zoro wasn't wasting any time, it seemed, and wanted to figure out exactly what was going on. Which, if Luffy thought about it, sort of made sense. They had only really been traveling together for a couple days at this point. That was your Conqueror's Haki, right? The thing you used to knock those three out from before. Luffy nodded at this. Look guys, I know I promised to answer your guys' questions, but let's first get to the harbor. I want to start getting headed to the next island. And we still have to make sure the Buggy pirates leave this island alone. And at this, Luffy started heading in the direction of the harbor. How about you guys go bring the ship around to where Buggy's ship is, and I'll head directly there, Luffy said as he started walking towards the harbor with Buggy in tow. Nami and Zoro gave each other a look but said nothing and headed towards where their ships were located. After a short walk, they eventually made it to the boats. They were surprised when the three pirates Nami had tricked before, and then Zoro had later conscripted, were waiting for them. They had intended to steal back the treasure Nami had stolen from them and get revenge. Now they realized their mistake as they were facing down not just the girl, but Zoro as well. Zoro just gave them a look and said, "You're going to row us to your ship, all right?" The pirates, terrified, could only nod eagerly, not wanting to upset Zoro again. Zoro then began to take some of the supplies from the small boat and load up Nami's larger one. Nami had hesitated to allow Zoro to bring their stuff on board her own ship, but realized that Luffy was really her only shot to get rid of Arlong. So, for now, it would be alright if they sailed together. There wasn't much to be transferred and quickly found themselves on their way again. The three pirates were eager to take Nami and Zoro where they wanted. Back with Luffy, he had just made it to Buggy's ship. It seemed quiet, so there probably weren't many crew members on it. However, he hadn't fought Moji or Kabaji, so they were likely on the ship. Luffy lifted Buggy above his shoulder and launched him onto the boat, hearing a crash and yells of surprise. "Captain!" Luffy heard two distinct voices call out. Luffy launched himself with a pillar of ice and landed on the deck of the ship, causing the two pirates currently on board to turn in surprise. Luffy noticed that the captain's quarters of the vessel now had a decent-sized hole in it, although no other visible damage was done to the ship and seemed perfectly sailable. "Hey, you two, stop worrying about your captain," Luffy said while still walking towards the destroyed captain's quarters. The two Buggy pirates as well as their pet lion looked at him, surprised someone dared come aboard their ship despite its current condition. "Hey, just who do you think you are? You must be quite brave to dare come aboard the ship of Captain Buggy." Moji emphasized the name as if to make Luffy start quaking in his boots. "I wouldn't call it brave considering I'm the one who just put your captain through your ship. Now I have come to ask something of you if you'll listen." "And why the hell should we listen to you? I think we should just kick your ass instead." This time Kabaji spoke up. "Well, for one, if I'm strong enough to defeat your captain, I'm more than enough for the two of you. And your other reason is..." At this, Luffy powered both of his arms up with magma, allowing a single drop to hit the boat's deck, immediately starting to eat through the wood. "If you don't listen, I'll put your boat at the bottom of this harbor." The two men immediately stopped their advance, warily eyeing the man before them. Deciding he had the upper hand, Moji caved, saying, Okay, let's not be too hasty here. What do you want from us?" Luffy let the magma sink back into his skin and stopped the drop that was currently eating its way through the ship. "Well, back at Buggy's camp you'll find the rest of your crewmates. I want you to take them and your captain and get the hell off this island." The first mate and chief of staff looked at each other, at first unsure what to say. Without their captain guiding them, though, they supposed they really only had one choice. "And how do we know you aren't just going to destroy our ship while we're away?" "You don't. But what I really want is you to leave this town. And you're going to need a ship to do that. So ultimately you're just going to have to trust me," Luffy retorted while staring them both down. "Moji, I think we should do as he says. If he's really the one that defeated the captain, we're no match for him. We should just get out of here." Moji nodded at this. "Okay, we'll do as you asked. Just give us some time and we'll have our men on board and be on our way." "Well, get on your way then. I'll be here to make sure you leave," Luffy said, giving the three a harsh look that demanded compliance. The three Buggy pirates made their way off the ship and started heading to where their camp was. After they got some distance away, Luffy walked over to the rails, noticing the small vessel docking, and shouted down to his crew, "Hey, Nami, there is no one conscious on this ship right now. Do you want to search it for treasure?" And quicker than the eye could make out, Luffy was suddenly being dragged below deck. Great idea, Luffy. Help me in collecting his treasure, and I promise you will get around 1% of the haul. She said this while looking back at Luffy. Her eyes were replaced with berries. Luffy couldn't help but smile at this. This was the Nami he remembered. Okay, sounds like a plan, Nami. The two collected up the treasure that Buggy had accumulated and brought it to Nami's ship. Zoro then ordered their pirate captives to get back on their own ship. This was an order the three were eager to accept as they climbed back on their vessel. However, when they noticed their unconscious captain, they once again grew nervous. Just how strong were those pirates? They thought to themselves. Luffy then explained what had transpired aboard the pirate vessel to his two nakama while they waited for them to get back. Just like they had promised, the remaining Buggy pirates eventually returned with their pet lion following close behind with a cart laden with the unconscious crew members. The 5 conscious members of the Buggy pirates were currently giving uneasy glances towards the pirates in the small ship in which Luffy was now watching them intently. True to his word, Luffy let them set sail. When the ship was an acceptable distance away from the island, Luffy and company set out as well. No words were spoken for a while, but Luffy could tell the atmosphere was a little tense. Since it seemed they were a reasonable distance away from the island, he spoke up. So I'm guessing you guys want to talk now, right? Nami and Zoro gave a quick look at each other, and Nami nodded to Zoro, giving him the go-ahead at the first question. So what exactly happened between when I saw you last and now? You just single-handedly took down an entire pirate crew with little effort. Not only that, but you've got new abilities. And finally, why the hell does it look like you're older than me now? Zoro said, laying out all his concerns. Luffy was expecting this line of questioning but still had no clue how to answer it. He supposed he could just give them an abridged version of the truth. At this point, it might just be the easiest way. Luffy let out a long sigh, having made his mind up. Well, to be honest, a lot has happened. I am not the same Luffy you knew from Shell Town. Well, I am, but at the same time I'm not. That doesn't exactly answer my question, Luffy, Zoro said, crossing his arms in front of his chest. I know, just give me a second. I guess the simplest way to explain it is that I'm over 3 years older than I was when you last saw me. Luffy looked straight into Zoro's eyes when he said this, as if to convey the seriousness of his statement. Zoro narrowed his eyes at this but said nothing yet. However, that wasn't the case with Nami. What the hell do you mean by that? Nami seemed very flustered at the declaration by Luffy. How exactly does someone just age years in a matter of hours? He was either crazy, which meant she indeed shouldn't be traveling with him, or he was somehow telling the truth. That was even more troubling. Well, the reason I look older is that I've lived those 3 years. Over 3 years ago, at least to me, I set sail from this island just like we are now. But at that time I was exactly the same as I was the last time Zoro saw me. Now I'm doing it all over again. Are you trying to tell us that you are somehow from the future? And if that's what you're trying to tell us, how do you honestly expect us to believe you? That sounds absolute. But before Nami could continue, Luffy interrupted, saying, Nami, I know why you need the money, and why you hate Arlong. At this, Nami was stunned. She wasn't sure what to say, and her hand unconsciously reached for the tattoo underneath her shirt. Turning to Zoro, he said, I know why you carry the sword that you wield in your mouth, and why you must become the world's greatest swordsman. With this revelation, it was Zoro's turn to act stunned, although he hid it much better than Nami did. The three grew silent, and Luffy let them think on what he had said. After some time, Nami spoke up again, say that we believe you, but I'm still skeptical that you're not totally crazy. But if what you're saying is true, then why did you come back? At this, Nami and Zoro noticed he tensed up and averted his eyes, but not fast enough, as they both saw the tears forming in the corners of his eyes. I purposely came back, but it was because the alternative meant I just couldn't accept what happened. I had to come back to change what happens in the future. Luffy. At this, Luffy looked back up to Nami. What happened to make you come back? I had to come back because a man took everything I cared about in this world from me. He murdered my nakama and my brother. In the end, I was left with nothing. All because I wasn't strong enough. Were the two of us among those that this man killed? Nami asked, fearful of the answer. At this, Luffy could only nod weakly. Nami, I think we should leave the captain alone for a while. I don't think I'm the only one that wants to think on what's been said, Zoro said as he stood up and headed for the small cabin, being followed closely behind by Nami. Although Nami, as she entered, stole one last glance back to Luffy and noticed the tears were flowing more freely now. She could feel herself tearing up as well. As much as she wanted to believe that he was crazy, she was starting to seriously doubt it, which made what he said all the more terrifying. Luffy was now alone as the door to the cabin closed. Luffy moved closer to the prow of the ship and looked into the murky depths of the ocean. Since he had come back, there'd been no time to contemplate what had happened to him the past 24 hours. No time since the deaths of his nakama to mourn. But now two of them had just been right in front of him. They were alive again, just like that man had promised. He was sent back in time. But now what would happen? Although the man didn't say when he would send Luffy, he hadn't thought it'd be this far back. But even then, the man hadn't given him any pointers on how to deal with the situation he found himself in. Zoro had known something was wrong the instant he had seen him, but those were problems he would deal with tomorrow. For now, he wanted only to mourn the deaths of the nakama he had lost. It turns out he wouldn't get the luxury. So what'd I tell you, pretty neat, huh? Is it everything you'd thought it would be? Luffy recognized that voice. Turning around, he saw the skeletal-like man grinning down at him. Luffy was now looking at the man that sent him back in time. He hadn't really expected to see him ever again, to be honest. The man gave him an uneasy feeling. What are you doing here? The man, grinning, let out a chuckle at this. Still as rude as ever, I see. I thought I told you to work on that. But no matter, that's not why I came here. So again, what are you doing here? Well, to check up on you, of course. I wanted to see how you were doing. After all, it's gotta be nice to see your nakama alive again and not screaming in agony as they're burned alive. He didn't change his sickening smile, but he got a glint in his eye as if he knew he was going to get a rise out of Luffy. Surprisingly enough, he didn't though. Luffy had a dark look across his face, and he turned back toward the ocean. Why did you choose to send me here? I mean, it seems like it would be easier to just send me back later or even before my nakama met me, especially since I had to tell them what happened to me. He laughed again at this. Well, to be honest, I had no real reason to send you here besides to screw with you. Putting you here puts you in the unique position where you still have most of your adventure in front of you, while also needing to explain yourself to the only two nakama you have so far. The man smirked down at Luffy. To be honest, I thought you'd come up with some kind of a lie, but I guess it does not surprise me. You're too much of a goody two-shoes to do that. You're just lucky they didn't think you were crazy after you pulled the I'm from the future card. Your only real reason was to screw with me, Luffy said, somewhat surprised. You'll find a lot of what I do is designed to mess with you, Luffy, he said with mock sweetness. Well, if your only reason coming here was to check on me, I'm doing fine, so I think it would be best if you leave, Luffy said, a hint of anger coming through his voice. Oh my, the pale man said, chuckling so rude. He walked up behind Luffy and put a hand on his shoulder. Luffy at first made to brush his hand away, but he suddenly found himself surrounded by intense heat. Looking around, Luffy saw it was the island that he had battled Sakazuki on, and it was still bathed in magma. Surrounding him was all of his dying nakama slowly sinking down into the magma. They were all staring straight at him with pain racking their features. It was at this moment that the man chose to speak. The next time you decide to be mouthy, I think it would be wise to remember exactly what I saved you from. You have a second chance because of me. I will leave when I damn well please. Anyway, on that sour note, I do suppose it is getting awful late, so I will leave you to your thoughts. With that, he was gone just as suddenly as he appeared. Luffy found himself exactly where he was before, at the prow of the ship. The faces of his nakama were still burned into his memory, however. The look of pain as the life slowly left their eyes was terrifying to him. As he let out a low sob, tears trickled down his face. I won't let that ever happen again. I will get stronger. And this time I will make sure my nakama never die, Luffy declared to himself. Although he wasn't aware of it, one other person had heard his declaration. Nami stood quietly at the door. She hadn't meant to listen in, but she had come out just as he had started crying. She opened the door a little more, moving through the doorway as she did, and slowly walked over to Luffy. Nami, what are you doing out here? Luffy said as he attempted to stifle his crying, wiping the remnants of his tears on his sleeves. Well, I wanted to check up on you. You've been out here for a while now, so I wanted to know if you were all right. Yeah, sorry Nami, I'm okay. I was just thinking about the past. Nami still had one thing on her mind though. Luffy, can I ask you a question? Turning around, Luffy looked at Nami. Sure, what is it? What I wanted to ask is if you and Zoro were pirates. At this, Luffy nodded yes. And in the past, or the future, I was a pirate like you. And at this, Luffy nodded again. Okay, thanks for telling me. Look, Luffy, you should get some sleep, it's getting late. So the two got up and moved into the small cabin. Luffy noticed 3 bedrolls laid out and selected the one that was still untouched and slid himself in. Not too long after that, sleep slowly overcame him. One person was still awake, contemplating the events that had led to her being here. They were certainly odd. First, some man falls out of the sky and ends up being some super-powered weirdo. Then he ends up taking down an entire pirate crew single-handedly in seconds. The crew had gone down in one instant and their captain the next, and now she was sailing with them to some island to look for a bigger ship. On top of that, if she were to believe Luffy, he is also from the future, sent back to keep his nakama from dying. And she was one of those nakama. She had been a pirate. That fact was probably the second most troubling thing she had learned. The first being her unfortunate demise. She hated pirates, so why would she become one? Looking at the man that seemed destined to be her captain, she started to see why. Despite being a pirate, he seemed kind. And he had kicked Buggy and his crew out of that town. He looked powerful, but he didn't seem to abuse that power like many other pirates. Pirates like Arlong did, and Luffy seemed determined to rid her island of him. While Buggy was nowhere near the strength of Arlong, seeing how little effort it took to take him down, she could see that if anyone could do that, it'd be Luffy. So maybe it might not be so bad to be a pirate if she was following him. Finally, the last of the Straw Hats drifted off to sleep. The next morning the three had gathered outside. The Straw Hat crew were still plotted for a course directly to a small island south of where they had been before. So Luffy, you've been to this island before, right? Yeah, if I remember right, it's called Gecko Island, and there is a village there called Syrup Village. That is where we are headed. So Luffy, this island we're headed to, you said it has a ship for us? Zoro asked. Yeah, it does, and it's just about the greatest ship to ever sail these seas. It was called the Going Merry, Luffy said with a far-off look in his eyes. He was likely reminiscing on previous adventures. And with their destination confirmed, Nami made her way back into the cabin to sort through the treasure they had looted from Buggy. Zoro didn't respond but was absorbed in his own thoughts as well. He wasn't entirely sure if he bought this whole time traveler business, but Luffy supposed it was as good as explanation as any to what exactly happened to the kid he had watched get taken by that bird. It didn't really matter if he didn't entirely believe Luffy's story though. He had sworn to follow him as his first mate, so that was what he was going to do, time traveler or not. So Nami told me you had a different devil fruit. Would you mind showing me some of your new powers? Zoro said, looking at his changed captain. Yeah, I can show you my ice powers, but I don't want to risk losing the ship with my magma ones. So here. He channeled his ice powers into his left arm, turning it completely to ice. Hey, Zoro, how about you take a swing at it with one of your swords? Zoro stood up and started to draw one of his swords. You sure about this, Luffy? Do you really think your ice can stop my sword? Luffy just grinned at this, something like that. Just take a swing and see for yourself. So with some reluctance, Zoro took a swing at the arm, half expecting it to stop his sword. But to his horror, when his sword came into contact with Luffy, it plowed through the ice, causing the limb to shatter. Luffy gripped what was now the stump of his severed arm and screamed in pain. Zoro wasn't sure what to do. The moron had told him to do it. It wasn't his fault he cut off his arm, was it? It was at this point that Nami chose to come out, hearing the scream of pain from Luffy. The first thing she saw was Luffy gripping what seemed to be what was left of his arm. The next thing she saw was Zoro standing there with sword drawn and a stupefied look on his face. What the hell is going on out here? Zoro started to sputter out an explanation, but all Nami could make out was something about Luffy telling him to do it. She was about to interrogate him further, but they both noticed that Luffy's screaming had died down and he now seemed to be attempting to stifle laughter. Soon enough he busted out laughing, and while holding up the shortened arm, before their very eyes, ice started to flow from the stump, reforming his arm, and after then turned back into flesh and bone. Luffy continued laughing, holding up his now fully formed arm. Nami was pissed. She couldn't believe she would actually be worried about the moron. Giving him a swift punch to the back of the head, she screamed out, "Next time I hear screams like that, one of you had better be missing a limb." And with that outburst, she went back into the cabin. Luffy was now sporting a massive bump on the back of his head, and No was no longer laughing. A muttered "so cruel" could be heard from Luffy as he slumped over. "Well, serves you right for making us think I cut your damn arm off." Zoro decided to leave the captain to his pain and moved to the back of the ship with the intention of taking a nap. Luffy decided that the pain was worth it. He hadn't pulled a prank like that in a long time. But with nothing much else to do, he shook off his injuries and looked towards the horizon. He could just barely see the outline of an island. "Here we come, Usopp and Mary. We'll be there soon," Luffy said, smiling. Then a few hours later, the three-man crew found themselves pulling into a small inlet on the island. It seemed there weren't many places to pull into, as the rest of the island seemed to be made of tall cliffs overlooking the ocean. The inlet had a long slope leading up to where Luffy had said should be a village. After landing, they found themselves surrounded by flags, all bearing the same marking of a skull with an elongated mouth. Then a man came out of the bushes and announced himself. "I am the great Captain Usopp, and surrounding you are my 80 million men. If you leave this island now, I may choose to spare your lives," the long-nosed man said, standing proudly with a slingshot in his hand. Nami, seeing through the ruse, easily asked, "Usopp, you're lying, aren't you?" Usopp, being the terrible liar that he was, immediately shouted out, "Yikes." She saw through it. Nami coolly replied, "See, you admitted it." Usopp, once again overreacting, shouted, "I admitted it," to her, while clutching his face and swaying side to side. He attempted to save face by stating 80 million may have been an exaggeration, but I do have great men under my command. The three could see 6 flags start to move up and down. Nami, noting the number, said simply, "Like maybe 3 people." And immediately 3 children clutching flags shot out of the bushes. She saw through it. "Our run," and they threw down their flags, leaving their captain to face the pirates alone. Hey, you guys, don't run away. You said your name was Usopp, right?" Luffy chose to speak up. "Ah, so I see you have heard of me then." "Yes, everything that they say about the great Captain Usopp and more is all true," Usopp said, taking a heroic position, although he couldn't keep his knees from wobbling. "Oh well, not exactly. You see, I knew your dad, Usopp. He and Captain Shanks visited my town for a while, and your dad told me enough about you to make my ears sore." Usopp was surprised at this. "Wait, you knew my dad?" Do you mean to tell me my dad is sailing under the great pirate red-haired Shanks? Shishishi, yeah he is. And he's probably the best sniper I've ever seen. I haven't seen him since he left with Shanks all those years ago though. Look, me and my crew are hungry, how about we talk about this over a meal? Luffy said, smiling up at his future crew member. Yeah, sure, I know a great place in the village we can get some food. The three Straw Hats met up with Usopp towards the top of the slope and headed to the village together. After enjoying a meal together with Luffy regaling Usopp in some tales about his father, they started to discuss the reason for the pirates' arrival on the island. So Usopp, do you know anyone here with any sailing experience or someone who could supply a large ship? Nami asked. Well, you see, this is a small town and I'm sorry, but we just don't have what you need. On the top of the hill, there was a huge mansion. Zoro spoke up. At this, Nami perked up. Say, do you know them, Usopp? Do you think they could help us out with a ship? Usopp grew sour at this and yelled, you can't go there. Then he oddly enough made up some lame excuse and took off, leaving the three alone in the restaurant. What was that all about? Nami then turned to Luffy. I'm guessing you know where he went, don't you? Yeah, but let's give him some time, I want to finish up this meal. So as Luffy finished the last remnants of the food, they started to leave the building. Well, Usopp knows the girl in the mansion, so that's where he is headed. He told us not to go there, so if he's nakama with the girl, why can't we meet with her? Nami asked. Well, the girl has apparently been holed up in her house ever since her parents died a while back from an illness. The girl is depressed, and Usopp goes there to cheer her up. Oh, that's actually quite sweet for him to do that, Nami said. Yeah, but I'm going to tell you guys now, we're going to have some fighting to do pretty soon here. Kaya's butler is really a pirate who's been plotting to get her wealth from her after she dies. Actually, the man's crew should be coming here tomorrow to help him. So what are we going to do then, Luffy? Nami asked. We will keep him from harming Kaya, and we're going to have to take him and his crew down to do it. The three set off on the path up towards the mansion, one of them knowing exactly what was going to happen, and the other two interested to see whether or not events would play out as Luffy had said. If he was right, then they were going to have to get ready for a large battle tomorrow. Soon the three found themselves approaching the massive gates of the mansion. Luffy led them around the side, and they saw the pulled-out block of the hedge. So this is where Usopp entered? Nami asked. Luffy nodded at this and crawled through the opening. He motioned for the others to do the same and walked to where Usopp was currently telling Kaya about some story involving a giant goldfish. Hey Usopp, why'd you run off? Luffy shouted out, causing both Usopp and Kaya to look down at the small group. Luffy, what are you doing here? I thought I told you guys to stay away from here, Usopp said, narrowing his eyes at the three. We came to ask for her help, Luffy said, smiling. You need some help from me. How could I help you guys? Kaya said, who was confused at the sudden newcomers. We came to see you because we were hoping you could help us get a great big ship. You there? What are you doing? Looking to their right, they could see a tall, thin man dressed in a black suit and glasses approaching. Judging by his facial expression, he was not pleased about their presence. Luffy, is that the butler you were talking about? Nami asked in a hushed tone. Yeah, but don't say anything about it or else he might change his plans. I don't appreciate you breaking in here without permission, Kuro said while fixing his glasses on his face. Kaya started to speak up at this point. Actually, Klahadore, these people are. But Kuro interrupted her, stating that can wait for now. I can hear all about your reasons later. Now leave, all of you, or do you have something to say? Well, Klahadore, we actually came here hoping for some help in getting a ship, Luffy said, staring the butler down. Kuro was slightly unsettled at the way he said his name, but he assumed it was because they weren't pleased with being asked to leave the property. He responded simply no, and after this, he looked up roughly towards where Usopp was currently hiding on the other side of the tree. Usopp, I've heard all about you. You're well known in the village. At this, Usopp started to climb back onto the branch that he was sitting on before. Yeah, he asked. I hear you've been on many an adventure. Quite impressive for someone so young. You can call me Captain Usopp, too, since you admire me so much, he said, smirking and pointing a thumb at himself. Captain, huh? I've heard all about your father as well. What? Usopp was surprised at this. Kaya started to shout, Klahadore, stop. You're nothing but the son of a filthy pirate. Luffy looked up at Kuro. He had kind of forgotten about his hypocritical rant against pirates. Nothing you do will surprise me, but I ask that you stay away from the lady of this house. Filthy. Usopp was furious at this point. He let most anything slide when it came to insulting himself, but his father was a great man. Klahadore had no right to talk of his father that way. She and you are from completely different worlds. Is it money you're after? How much do you want? At this, Kaya looked appalled at her butler's behavior. That's enough, Klahadore. Apologize to Usopp. Usopp, turning to Kaya, noticing how far she was leaning out the window, said, Hey, now, be careful, Kaya. What reason is there to apologize to this savage man? My lady, I am merely stating the truth. I feel for you. You must truly hate your great idiot of a father for abandoning his family and village because of his lust for treasure. Klahadore, Kaya shouted out. Don't you dare insult my father anymore. Usopp looked beyond mad at this point. He then used a grappling hook to rappel down the tree, landing safely at the bottom. Hands clutched at his sides, he stared Klahadore down. What are you getting unnecessarily riled up for? Why not simply tell another of your special lies at a time like this, about how your father is really a traveling salesman, or how you're not really related by blood? At this point, Usopp started to lunge forward ready to punch Kuro, but was held back by someone. Turning around with fury in his eyes, he was met by the steady gaze of Luffy. Why'd you stop me from hitting him? Usopp, he just isn't worth it. He is just trying to rile you up so you do something like this. He wants to give Kaya a reason to dislike you. At this, Usopp softened Kaya. He said softly. Looking up, she still seemed furious, but it looked like the anger was still directed at Klahadore. I'm sorry, he whispered again and ran towards the hole in the hedge and dived through. Klahadore, why did you have to say such cruel things to Usopp? He has been nothing but nice to me. He's my only true friend, and you. Kaya was now crying heavily and slammed her windows shut, not wanting to see his face anymore. Kuro glared at the remaining 3 people in the yard. I request that you leave immediately and never come near this mansion again. And so the 3 did just and left the same way Usopp had. Kuro wasn't expecting it to end up this way. He had deliberately worked Usopp up so that he would hopefully hit him, and then Kaya would begin to dislike the boy. Instead, that Straw Hat Kid had intervened. And now Kaya was furious with him. It was of no consequence though. Come tomorrow, Kaya would be dead, and her fortune would be his. With that last thought in mind, he smirked and walked back towards the entrance of the house. Kaya was now sitting alone in her bed. She had gotten up and locked the door, not wanting to be disturbed by anyone. Why did Klahadore have to be so cruel to Usopp? She knew he was most likely trying to do what was best for her, but couldn't he see that Usopp was a good man? He was one of the only things that would consistently brighten her days since her parents had died. She soon heard a knocking at her door. It was most likely Klahadore. Miss, I have your meal. Would you mind unlocking your door? She was right, it was him. No thanks, I don't want it. To be honest, she was pretty hungry, but she just couldn't bear to see Klahadore right now. The cook would be sad to hear you say that. He works his hardest to come up with meals that suit your needs. Just go away, Klahadore. I don't want to talk to you right now. All right, miss, I understand you are mad that I upset your friend's feelings. But you have to understand he is no good for a lady of your standing. However, I will do as you ask, but I'll leave the food outside your door, and I would ask that you would consider eating. Kaya began to hear the soft tapping of his shoes as he walked away. She continued crying softly to herself. She was worried about Usopp and hoped that he was okay. Luffy, Nami, and Zoro were currently walking the path back to the village. Luffy decided to stop them and said, hey, how about you guys wait here? I'm going to go find Usopp and get him to calm down. All right, Luffy, just don't take too long. I don't want to be sitting here forever, Zoro said as he began to lean against the fence, looking like he was about to take a nap. I'll be back soon. And so Luffy took off in the direction Usopp should be. Not too long after Luffy left, Nami noticed those 3 kids from before coming up the road. As they approached, she could see the kids recognized them and began running their way. You old hag, what did you do with our captain? Nami's eye twitched at this old hag. She'd show them an old hag and immediately gave all 3 a swift punch to the back of the head. What the hell is wrong with you kids going around calling me an old hag? Sorry, the 3 subdued kids said at once. But if you didn't do anything with our captain, where is he then? How should I know? The guy took off running earlier, and our captain is currently out looking for him. He was gonna bring him back here, so you'll just have to wait here like us if you want to find your captain. Since the 3 kids had no other good ideas, simply decided to wait patiently with the scary pirate lady and the green-haired guy. But the 5 of them eventually noticed an odd man coming from the direction of the village. He was walking backward for some reason at a relatively slow pace. They watched as the strange guy eventually made their way to them. He was going to keep sliding by when one of the kids spoke up. What's up with you, weird guy? Why are you walking backward? He looked towards the 3 kids and shouted, hey, who's calling me a weird guy? I am not weird. Nami spoke up, saying, seem pretty weird to me. Don't be stupid. I'm just an ordinary hypnotist. Nami couldn't help but think, what the hell is ordinary about a backward walking hypnotist? But before she could voice those thoughts, the 3 kids interrupted. Hypnotist. Awesome. Show us something. Yeah, do something. They all shouted in sequence. What? Don't be dumb. Why should I have to reveal my techniques to a bunch of strangers? But before anyone could respond, he had suddenly pulled out some weird ring on a string and seemed intent on doing just that. All right, watch this ring closely. Zoro, sounding surprised, said, you're gonna do it. You'll feel sleepy at the count of 1, 2, Django. All right, here we go. 1, 2, Django. And suddenly all 4 were lying flat on their backs, passed out. 3 kids and the hypnotist were all out and snoring. Zoro again said, geez, what's with this guy? A while later, Luffy finally found Usopp. He was at the same cliff that he had been the last time he found him. So coming up behind him, he announced his presence. Yo, here you are. Usopp seemed surprised to see Luffy. Oh, it's just you. At least say something, will ya? So what, do you want something? Yeah, I guess I just wanted to see if you were alright, Luffy said as he sat next to Usopp. That damn butler insulting my old man like that, Usopp said, shaking his fist in anger. Yeah, I hate that guy too. No matter what anyone says, Usopp was a great pirate. Yeah, Usopp seemed to perk up at this. In this day and age where pirates are everywhere, I'm proud of my old man for living with his life on the line at sea. Yet, that bastard stomped all over my pride. He'll pay for this. Luffy couldn't help but smirk at this. Usopp didn't know how right he was, and when he figured out precisely what Kuro was planning, it was only going to make him madder. So what about you and that girl? Usopp, misinterpreting what Luffy meant, spluttered, what do you mean? See, there is nothing between Kaya and me. Luffy, confused, said, I meant, are you gonna go see her anymore? That butler seemed pretty against it. Usopp, seemingly relieved, said, why yeah, I dunno. If that butler comes and apologizes to me, I might consider it. But it was then that Luffy noticed Kuro coming up the coast with Django close behind. You mean that butler? Usopp, looking down, said, yeah, that butler. But then it hit him, what's he doing out here? Usopp seemed surprised, and his eyes were wide open, staring down at the butler he had nearly slugged not too long ago. And so the two silently watched from above. Luffy quietly urged Usopp to lay flat against the ground to keep from being spotted. They began listening in on the conversation between Kuro and Django. Hey, Django, I told you to avoid doing anything to make you stand out, Klahadore said to the man Usopp didn't recognize. I don't stand out one bit. I'm not weird, either, Django replied, even though Klahadore had said nothing about being weird. So, preparations for the plan are ready, I hope, Klahadore said, not responding to his subordinate's eccentricities. Of course, Captain. We can start anytime. The rich girl assassination plan, Django said, shouting out the last part. Luffy, knowing Usopp was about to yell out, slapped a hand over his mouth while making a shushing noise. Usopp nodded at this and understood. He began to listen, and again towards the traitorous butler and the strange man. Don't call it assassination, Django. That has a bad ring to it, Klahadore said, narrowing his eyes. Oh, right. Accident. It's an accident, Django said, placating his captain. Luffy spoke in a hushed tone. Usopp, do you think it sounds like they're planning on killing that girl? Usopp nodded at this. We can't simply kill her. Miss Kaya must perish in an unfortunate accident. Don't mess that up, Kuro ordered. So basically, on your signal, the men and I storm the village and kill the girl. And then you'll get her inheritance, Django said, attempting to summarize the plan. You fool, you don't understand a thing. How would I, an outsider, inherit Kaya's estate? Before you kill her, you'll use hypnosis to make Kaya write her will, and you will make her leave everything to me, her ever-loyal butler, Kuro said, getting angry once again. So this is what 3 years of planning has led to, But you sure scared us back then, Captain Kuro. Don't call me that. I abandoned that name 3 years ago. I now want to obtain great sums of money, without the government on my back. Luffy decided that Usopp had most likely heard all he needs to know. Hey, we need to go warn Kaya about Kuro's plan. You're right, I've got to protect her from that bastard. And so silently the two began to sneak off away from the edge. After they got far enough away, started running back towards the mansion. On their way there, Luffy noticed Usopp had begun crying. Luffy tried to reassure him as best he could. Look, Usopp, I know you're worried about what's going to happen, but I promise me and my crew will back you up in protecting Kaya and the village. I can defeat Kuro myself when it comes to that. Usopp looked towards Luffy. He had a stern expression on his face that seemed to hold complete confidence in his words. So Usopp nodded and wiped the tears from his eyes. Thank you, Luffy. Back with Zoro, Nami and the kids. One of the kids remarked, Captain's been gone a long time. Zoro nodded at this. Luffy, too. One of the kids, looking out over the path, noticed two figures approaching in the distance. Soon enough, all three had noticed and were shouting, Captain. As the two got close, Luffy started to slow down to talk to his crew while Usopp kept running ahead to warn Kaya. Guys, Kuro has revealed his plan, and it's going on tomorrow. We overheard it at the shore, so Usopp has gone to warn Kaya. We're gonna help him stop it from happening. Nami and Zoro nodded at this and prepared to go with Luffy. One of the kids asked, wait, what should we do then? Luffy gave this some thought before saying, you guys are needed in the village, make sure no pirates attack, and if they do, you need to tell us. The three, saluting, shouted aye, and started towards the town. Luffy, Nami and Zoro began to run in the same direction, passing them by quickly. They had to catch up to Usopp, so they left the kids behind. As they were running, Nami and Zoro couldn't help but realize that Luffy had been so far right about everything that had been said. If a pirate crew led by the butler attacked tomorrow, then there would be no more doubt among them about Luffy. There would be too much that had gone exactly as he said to not believe it. They soon caught up to Usopp, who was seen panting in the middle of the village. As Luffy got close, he could tell what Usopp was planning on doing. Look, Usopp, it's not going to do any good warning them. They aren't going to believe us. The only thing we can do is protect the village ourselves. Usopp was first seemed conflicted at this. He felt he needed to warn the village. But then it hit him, Luffy was right. He came through this village pretty much every day shouting about pirates. There was no way that people were going to believe him, so he reluctantly accepted, and the four started running towards the mansion. And soon they were back at the secret entrance through the hedges. Usopp, pulling the cube through and setting it aside, went through first, followed closely by the other three. Luffy stopped Usopp before he could shout out to Kaya. "Look, Usopp, I think this conversation is something we're going to need to do inside. I think she is going to have a hard time believing you while you shout from her windowsill." Usopp thought about this and couldn't help but think he was probably right, so he nodded to show his acceptance. He then began collecting small rocks and tossing them at Kaya's window in the hope of getting her attention. A muffled Usopp could be heard from within the house, and soon the window opened. Kaya looked down from her windowsill and seemed happy to see Usopp and said, "Thank goodness. I thought you might never come back. Look, Kaya, I really need to talk to you about something. It's essential. Can we come inside? We really need to discuss what we overheard with you." Kaya looked reluctant at first, but seeing the determination on Usopp's face, decided to comply. "Come around to the front, and I'll let you in." And so the four went around towards the front entrance of the mansion. Soon the doors unlocked, and they were ushered inside by Kaya. "Guys, look, be quiet. Mary is working in the other room, so we can talk in my room." After reaching the solitude of Kaya's room, she quickly shut and locked her door and turned expectantly to the group. "So what exactly is so important that needed to be discussed right now? Kaya, I know you're not going to want to believe me, but I need you to trust me on this. I know I lie a lot, but what I'm about to tell you I would never make up." Kaya seemed slightly apprehensive, and to be honest, she was feeling a little frightened. This wasn't the Usopp she usually knew. "Usopp, what is going on?" "It's about Klahadore. He is not who he seems. He has been lying to you so that one day he could get a hold of your fortune." "Usopp, I know you don't like Klahadore, but that is no reason to slander him like this. I know what he said about your father was." "Kaya, I don't give a damn what he said about my father. At least not since I heard what he was planning to do to you. He plans on getting someone to force you to write a will in his name just so he can kill you and claim the inheritance." Kaya was stunned at what Usopp was saying. She wanted to believe it was a lie, but this wasn't something Usopp would lie about, that much she knew. She looked towards the other three that had come with Usopp, and the one with the straw hat began to speak. "Look, I know how this must look to you. On the one hand, you have the man that has taken care of you for the past several years, and on the other, you have Usopp that spends time with you just about every day to cheer you up. It isn't an easy choice who to trust, and I know you have no reason to trust me. But you know, Usopp, he would never say this if he didn't think it was true. I saw with my own eyes that Klahadore is currently planning on killing you and inheriting your money." Kaya thought on this, and while she wasn't entirely sold on the fact that the man that had been loyal to her for 3 years was apparently trying to kill her, she knew one thing, and that was that she could trust Usopp. "So ... what do we do then?" "Well, we simply have to wait for Kuro to come back. He has no reason to suspect that we're onto them, and then we'll figure out what to do next. So we're just going to wait for him to come back then." "All right, but what should we do until then?" "Well, we should wait downstairs where there is a view of the front gate. We might want to confront Kuro when he is still outside the mansion. There is going to be a fight, and the fewer things in the way the better." "Wait, you're actually going to fight Klahadore?" "Kaya, you're going to need to stop thinking of him as Klahadore now. His name is Captain Kuro." "All right, well, we should head downstairs then and explain this to Mary." The group headed down to the main entrance of the mansion and were greeted by Mary, or at least Kaya was. "Miss Kaya, what are all these people doing here? You know you should be resting right now. Shall I ask them to leave?" "No, Mary, look, we have something to tell you. It's about Klahadore." "What about Klahadore?" "Well, he seems to not be the man that we all thought he was. Klahadore is really a pirate that once went by the name Captain Kuro." "But Miss Kaya, that is simply ridiculous. It is obvious that Usopp and these other ruffians are filling your head with lies. Now, why don't you just go back to your room and I will send them away?" "No, Mary, I know how unlikely this sounds, but no matter how much we don't want to believe it, what if it is true? Are we just going to let him get away with it?" Kaya shouted while standing defiantly in front of the group. "Miss Kaya, if that is the way you truly feel, then I will support you," Mary said, conceding to the lady of the house. "Well, Kuro should be getting back soon. And until then we have to simply wait for him to come back. When he does, I want to talk with him to hear directly from him whether this is true." The group waited for several more hours. It seemed like Kuro wouldn't be getting back until late tonight. Eventually, a lone man was spotted outside the gates, opening them up to allow himself in. He seemed to be carrying some sort of bag, and after having gotten a closer look, it was undeniably the man they were waiting for. The Straw Hats, followed by Usopp, Kaya, and Mary, all walked outside to meet Kuro. And as they did, they noticed that the butler had stopped at this point and was watching the group with interest. "Miss Kaya, may I ask why you have let pirate scum into the mansion?" "Mary, I expected better of you. I am gone for 1 day, and you let these ruffians associate themselves with Miss Kaya." "Shut it, Captain Kuro. We know all about your plan." Kuro fixed his eyes on the one who spoke, the kid with the straw hat. How the hell does this kid know my name? Is it possible he overheard my meeting with Django? Captain Kuro, why I must say, I believe you have me mistaken with someone else. My name is Klaha. Klahador, stop it. Just tell me the honest truth. Is what they say true? That you are planning on killing me and getting my inheritance? This time he looked to Kaya. She seemed like she already knew the truth and merely wanted to hear it from him. Well, this was most unfortunate, but the plan was still salvageable. After all, he only needed to kill the witnesses and leave Kaya alive long enough to get her to write her will. And so he began to unzip his bag. Miss Kaya, I have to say I am hurt that you would think I, your loyal butler, would ever do such a thing. After all, I have been loyal for the past 3 years ever since your father took me in. Don't you trust me? As he was talking, he had finished opening the bag. Before anyone could respond, Kuro had launched himself forward, slipping on the gloves as he did so. Looking toward the man that started all this, he pulled back his hand, preparing to slit the throat of the long-nosed fool. But before he could, the Straw Hat Kid had placed himself in the way, blocking his attack with an arm that seemed to be made entirely of ice. A devil fruit power, Kuro thought to himself. This might be slightly more difficult than he initially intended. He launched his other hand forward only for it to be caught by his other hand. This boy is fast, almost as fast as me even. He started to feel an intense heat where the man had grabbed his other hand. Looking down, he noticed the kid's arm was coated in magma. Pulling himself free, he jumped back. This fight was definitely going to be difficult. However, his claws that had been touched by the magma were useless now. The metal had started to liquefy under the heat, and he was forced to drop the glove. He watched the Straw Hat Kid with new appreciation. Kuro had underestimated him. He watched as the kid slowly started to walk towards him, intending to continue the fight, it seemed. But he was stopped when Kaya shouted out, "Klahador, how could you?" Kuro smirked at this. She was still calling him by the name she had known him by. He looked towards her and was surprised to see her brandishing a flintlock pistol. It was the one her late father had kept in a display. "I won't let you hurt them, Klahador." "Tch, are you really going to shoot me, Kaya? I have been your loyal servant for 3 years, and you are just going to cut me down in cold blood." At this, Kuro let out a cruel laugh. He began to affix his glasses with his one gloved hand. "I think we both know you don't have the strength to." And suddenly a shot rang out in the silent night. Kuro felt a thud followed by intense pain in his chest. He looked down to see a hole that was now spurting blood. He was suddenly feeling weak and fell to his knees. He looked back at Kaya, who was now crying and weakly holding the smoking pistol. Where had he gone wrong? His plan had been all but assured to succeed. Looking towards the 3 people that had only arrived at the mansion, he realized it must have been them. These 3 nobodies had somehow thrown a wrench into his plan. But he didn't have any time left to dwell on this. He was feeling weaker by the second, and his heart was stopping. Kuro realized that he was dying. With his last breath, he let out a raspy Kaya, and he fell to the ground. Captain Kuro, the man of 100 plans, was dead. Kaya dropped the gun and continued sobbing, falling to her knees as she did so. Luffy looked between Kaya and Kuro. He was stunned. This isn't how it happened before. Luffy wasn't sure what to do. He had just watched Kaya put a hole through Kuro. Where had she gotten the gun? He assumed that last time she had picked it up from one of the unconscious pirates. But that wasn't the case apparently. Usopp was the first to react and rushed to Kaya's side to soothe her. "Kaya, are you all right?" Kaya grabbed onto Usopp and started crying into his shoulder. I killed him." Kaya stuttered, still crying into Usopp's shoulder. "I just didn't want him to hurt you. Look, Kaya, you did the right thing. It was either him or all of us, and you made the right choice," Usopp said, reassuring her. Mary was shell-shocked. He couldn't even move. Sweet innocent Kaya had just killed a man before his very eyes. He was unsure what to do, but was glad Usopp seemed to know. Why hadn't he insisted the lady stay inside? A part of him was sure that this would all be a lie from Usopp, and when Klahador got back he would prove so. Then Miss Kaya would send the ruffians away and he wouldn't have to worry about them again. In the end, he had stood aside and been useless. If it had been up to him, Kaya and likely himself would have been dead by the hand of a man he had come to see as a close friend. What kind of a butler was he to stand by and watch as Kaya was forced to shoot a man to protect herself and her friends? He could only hope Miss Kaya wouldn't suffer too much from her decision. He knew it would be a long time before he could forgive himself. Luffy shook himself out of the shock and started to think about what they needed to do next. "Why don't you 2 stay here, my crew, and I will go deal with the pirates," Luffy said. "I'll take care of Kuro too." Usopp nodded silently, thanking Luffy. And so the 3 Straw Hats left with Luffy slinging Kuro's body over his shoulder. Once they'd gotten a fair distance away from the mansion, Nami spoke up. "So why do I have the feeling that you weren't expecting Kaya to shoot him?" "Because you're right. I wasn't expecting that. It didn't happen before," Luffy stated simply. He had begun to realize that even the little things he had changed had led to a much more significant difference to the past. So what? Does that mean that what happened before doesn't necessarily mean it's going to happen again? Zoro asked. "No, I think if I acted the same as I did before, things would have happened the same way. But the thing is I haven't been acting the same ever since I came back. I've been making changes. Nothing massive I guess, but even the little changes I've made have had enough of an impact to cause Kaya to pull the trigger of that gun. So what are you going to do now? Zoro asked. At this point, he had pretty much accepted that Luffy had come from the future. He had no reason to think Luffy was lying, and the things he'd seen seemed only to prove it. Well, I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing, I guess. Try to make the past better. But from now on I can't expect to always know what's going to happen, I guess. Zoro simply nodded at this. Luffy continued the course to the North Inlet, leading his crew with him. He couldn't help but be slightly unnerved at the dead body now slung over his shoulder. While he had dealt with death before, he had not yet killed anyone, and carrying a dead enemy just seemed sort of morbid. But they were approaching where the Black Cat pirates would be landing. And just in time too, as the sun was starting to rise over the horizon. As they got to the top of the ramp, they could see a large ship pulling into the inlet, and soon enough pirates began unloading by the dozen. Well, guys, I guess it's time to tell them the bad news, huh? And so the three began making their way down the ramp. So far no one had noticed them. Django seemed to be giving a speech to his crew, but that ended as soon as they heard someone shout from up the ramp. Hey, you guys might want to turn around and leave this island, Luffy shouted to the odd pirates who for the most part were dressed as cats. Django, recognizing a couple of the people from before, shouted back to them, oh, and why would we do that? Well, your captain's dead, so I'd say that'd be a pretty good reason. The group of pirates began murmuring to themselves, Captain Kuro's dead. Django shouted back, oh, and what makes you think we'll believe something like that? Well, if you want proof, here it is. Luffy tossed the body to the ground. It rolled down the hill some way but eventually stopped face up. The Black Cats recognized it as being their captain. How the hell did you manage to kill Captain Kuro? Django said, sounding unnerved. Well, to be honest, I wasn't the one who did it, but your captain died of a bullet to the chest. Someone shot him. Who was it? That's not important. What is important is that you guys turn around and leave or we're going to have a problem, Luffy said, clenching his fists. Hey, Captain Django, this ship over here has loads of treasure in it. Should we take it aboard? Although Nami isn't going to be pleased, Luffy thought to himself, and as he looked over to Nami, he could see she was visibly fuming. Like hell, you're taking my treasure. Turning to Luffy and Zoro, she screamed, you two kicked their asses. Well, guys, looks like this isn't your day. Come on, Zoro, we've got work to do, Luffy said, chuckling to his first mate. Luffy channeled some of his ice powers to his feet and began sliding down the slope towards the enemy pirates. Zoro, drawing his swords, took off after him, running close behind. As Luffy slid down the path, small trails of ice lay in his wake where his feet had touched. This is pretty fun, Luffy thought to himself. He noticed that the pirates were starting to draw their weapons, preparing to attack. Django was spinning one of his discs in the air and soon enough let it loose towards Luffy. Luffy saw the disc leave his hand, prepared himself, and as the disc impacted, it was met with magma. The weapon quickly melted and poured to the ground in a silver trail as Luffy continued to slide towards the pirates. One of the pirates ran forward to meet Luffy with what looked to be a stone hammer. He raised it above his head and prepared to smash Luffy over the head. But Luffy, flipping himself over while channeling his ice powers to his right hand, as well as hardening his legs with ice and haki, sliding along the ground on his hand, he began spinning around. His legs were whirling like a top, and with a shout of icy spinning top, he started knocking some pirates into next week. First came the guy with the hammer. Having already started swinging it towards Luffy, the weapon connected with one of his feet, shattering the stone hammer instantly. The pirate didn't have time to be surprised, however, as the other leg came swinging around, hitting him right in the face, knocking him unconscious. It went like this for several more pirates until he began to lose momentum. Launching himself back onto his feet, he started sending several haki-infused punches towards many of his enemies, knocking down each one they connected with. He didn't want to severely harm any of these guys though, so he refrained from using his magma powers. Looking to Zoro, he seemed to be dealing with the enemy pirates just as effectively, taking them down left and right. Django began realizing that they were sure to lose this fight if he didn't bring the Nyaban brothers out. Sham, Buggy, get down here and help us. And as soon as the call was made, two men were suddenly at Django's side. One was a little shorter and stockier than Django, and the other being taller and bulkier than the rest of the crew. You called Captain Django? The smaller one asked. Yukao, the big one began, but was suddenly interrupted as a foot made of ice connected with his head, sending him crashing into a boulder, smashing it to pieces. Sham, furious at the attack on his brother, launched himself at Luffy but was intercepted by Zoro. Zoro had blocked the Nyaban brothers' attack with two of his swords as he slashed at the man's torso, dealing severe damage. Sham, unable to withstand the injury, collapsed as well, leaving only one Black Cat pirate still standing. Django held up his hands and began backing away from the monsters that had just destroyed his crew. Hey, let's not get too hasty here. I'm sure we could come to some agreement. Luffy was sick of the man and only sent a wave of haki towards him, knocking him unconscious just like the rest of his crew. Zoro sheathed his swords, and Luffy waved Nami over now that the fighting was done. So what should we do now? Nami asked after she had rejoined the two. Well, I guess we might as well loot their ship, I guess, Luffy said, scratching his head. How about you two focus on collecting supplies while I get their treasure? Nami said, the telltale berries flashing in her eyes. Shishishi, all right. Nami, that's fine with us, Luffy said, laughing. A little over an hour later, the three Straw Hats had finished looting the boat. They had found 3 bags worth of treasure and now had 2 bags filled with food and other supplies. Added to the 2 bags of treasure they already had, they must have had well over 20 million berries on them. I think we have everything we need from the ship. What are we going to do about these guys? Luffy thought about this for a minute. If he let them go, they might loot the village, harming innocents as they did so. Hey, Nami, how far is the nearest marine base? Luffy asked, getting an idea. Well, I think the closest one is just a few hours north of here. Why? Are you planning on calling them? Nami said, thinking about where the island was located. We can't just leave them where they're likely to hurt the people in the village, especially now that we've looted their ship. So if I can lock them up inside their ship by freezing it shut, that should hold them till a marine ship can get here. If that's what you want to do, then fine. But I'm not hauling those guys up there. You and Zoro can do that, Nami said, crossing her arms, looking defiantly back. Sheesh, all right. Zoro and I will load them up. You just make sure none of them start moving. And so Luffy and Zoro started dumping the unconscious men in the central part of the ship. After having done so, Luffy began the task of freezing off the only entrance. He made it thick enough so that none of the men should be able to break through, especially since they had gone through the trouble of disarming all of them before. An idea came to Luffy, and he smirked at the thought. I think I'll leave a little message here for the Marines. All right, Luffy, be quick about it. I don't want to be here all day, Zoro said, looking at his captain. Luffy used his magma powers to superheat one of his fingers. He then began burning a message into the wood of the ship. After a short while, he stood back and admired his work. Well, it'll certainly give the Marines something to talk about, Zoro said, smirking. Although your drawing skills could use some work. Shishishi, well, I never claimed to be an artist, but at least it gets the point across. All right, Luffy, well, what do you want to do about the dead guy? Should we stick him on the boat with the rest of his crew? Luffy stopped laughing. That's right, Kuro's dead this time, he thought to himself. Kaya had shot him. Well, I guess that's probably best. The Marines will probably be interested that the man they executed wasn't Kuro. So while Zoro and Nami head up the hill to wait at the top, Luffy brought the corpse of Kuro up to the ship and propped him against the frozen doorway. He laid the only remaining cat claw on Kuro's body so the Marines would have no question about the man's identity. And then he made his way to join his crew. So Luffy, should we start heading to the mansion? Yeah, I guess we still have to get a new ship, so we should bring all our supplies and treasure with us. The three, laden with treasure and supplies, began making their way towards the mansion. When they finally arrived, there was no sign of the 3 they had left behind, so they must have headed inside. Stepping over the blood stain left by Kuro as they entered the mansion, the first thing they noticed was Usopp and Kaya sitting on one of the couches in the entrance room. Kay was wrapped in a blanket and was currently leaning against Usopp. Kaya seemed to have calmed down, however, and was now drinking what looked to be hot tea. They were just keeping to themselves as no one was saying anything. Hey, guys, we took care of the pirates. They won't be bothering the village now. Usopp, looking up, took notice of them for the first time. He hadn't noticed them come in. He merely nodded to them. Thank you. I'm not sure what would have happened if you 3 hadn't helped us. He would have killed us, Kaya said sadly. Luffy had to agree with this. Kuro would have done so. Usopp would have likely gotten in the way of Kuro's plans, so he would have been killed. And there would have been no stopping him at that point. Kaya would have been killed as well as Mary. Most likely the pirates' attack would have resulted in a lot of the villagers' deaths. I don't regret killing him. At this point, Kaya looked to Luffy. Does that make me a bad person? Kaya, Usopp said, concerned for Kaya. Well, that depends on why you killed him, Luffy said, returning her stare. Did you do it for revenge? Because he was planning on stealing your money? Or did you do it because in doing so you protect the people you care about? Like Usopp and Mary. Kaya looked at Usopp and answered, I did it because I didn't want to lose the people I cared about. Usopp's face turned a little red at this, but smiled all the same. Well, then I say that makes you a good person then. You wanted to protect those you love, and so you did what you had to. At this, both Kaya and Usopp turned red and looked away from each other, but they still kept their proximity. Why, you 3 still need a ship, right? Kaya asked. Well, if you'd like, there is one I could give you guys. It's not huge, but it was designed by Mary and is an excellent ship, I am told. Thank you very much. We gladly accept your gift, Luffy said, grinning. And what about you, Usopp? Would you like to become a pirate? Yeah, I do. I want to become a brave warrior of the sea just like my father, Usopp said, the conviction showing in his eyes. So would you like to join our crew? We need a sniper, and I hear you're pretty good with that slingshot. Yes, I want to join your crew. Well then, welcome to the Straw Hats Pirates, Luffy said, looking excited. However, what no one noticed was a look of sadness that came over Kaya's face. Although it was quickly replaced by a smile, she was happy for Usopp even if it meant she wasn't going to see him for a long time. Seeing as it was getting late, Kaya offered them a place to stay at their mansion. After conversing with his crew, Luffy readily agreed. They made their way to the estate and dropped off the treasure and supplies they had collected from their ship in Kuros. Mary directed them to their separate rooms. And it wasn't long before the Straw Hats and new Nakama were fast asleep. The next morning the group found themselves at one of the other inlets of islands. And standing there was Mary, having brought the ship out of storage. Joining him were the 3 members of the Usopp pirates, Carrot, Onion, and Pepper. Usopp, seeing his crew, smiled. He was glad they would be here to see him off. Usopp pirates. Aye, Captain. The 3 of them shouted. I am leaving to become a pirate. So I'm sorry, but the Usopp pirates are disbanded. Usopp was grinning, but his mouth was twitching, betraying his sadness at having to leave behind his Nakama. We do not accept. They all shouted. Guys, we will never disband the Usopp pirates. But we know you need to leave. After all, a captain has to be a brave warrior of the sea. So while you are gone, we still are Usopp pirates for when you come back. Pepper was the one speaking, but all 3 had the same look of determination. Aye, Usopp P pirates. At this, Usopp was visibly tearing up. Although not wanting to cry in front of his men, he held his tears back. And then he turned to Kaya. Kaya, I'm going to miss you, but this is an opportunity I can't refuse. I need to set sail and have real adventures of my own. And when I get back, I'll have all sorts of new stories to tell. And they'll be the truth this time. I know that you must go, but I don't want you to leave me. Hearing this, Usopp looked down and away from Kaya, not sure what to say. But I won't ask you to stay. Turning to Luffy, she said something surprising. I want to become a pirate. Luffy gave her a solemn look. Mary took a step forward, surprised Miss Kaya. But Luffy interrupted, saying, Are you sure? A pirate's life is hard, and you may very well die out there on the sea. Do you have the strength to protect your Nakama? And if need be, lay down your life to protect them? Kaya slightly paled at this. Well, I am not quite strong enough now. I will strive to be strong enough, and if I have to, I will lay my life on the line. Luffy continued looking at her, judging her conviction. Then he gave an ear-splitting grin and said, Welcome to the Straw Hats. Both Mary and Usopp seemed concerned at this. However, Miss Kaya, are you sure this is what you want to do? Yes, Mary, I am sure. I am sorry, but it looks like I won't be back for a long time. Will you be okay here? Kaya said, concern showing for her friend. Certainly, Miss Kaya. I will continue watching the mansion in your absence. He then turned to Usopp. Mr. Usopp, I would ask you to ensure Miss Kaya comes back one day unarmed. Yourself as well. At this, Usopp nodded. I promise. Then I suppose this is goodbye then. At this, Mary was beginning to cry. I look forward to the day the 2 of you return. So the 5 Straw Hats climbed aboard the Going Merry with their supplies and treasure. They began preparing to set sail, and before they, the Straw Hats waved to their Nakama, being left behind. Goodbye, everyone. One day we'll be back, and we'll have tons of stories to tell. Usopp yelled. Bye, Captain Usopp. Bye, Kaya. Bye, Straw Hats. And with their farewells done, they launched the ship, looking forward to their next big adventure. Luffy and his crew began exploring their new home. Luffy walked up to the bow of the Going Merry and hoisted his way up so he could sit on his favorite spot. He affectionately rubbed Mary's figurehead. I missed you, Mary. I'm glad I get to have one last adventure with you, Luffy said, teary-eyed. He knew it wasn't going to last forever. One day Mary would be in too rough of shape to sail any further, and he would have to say goodbye once again. But today he was happy to sail with an old friend. Usopp and Kaya could be found at the stern, watching as their island grew smaller and smaller. They shared a small smile, thinking back on their time on Gecko Island. They knew it might be a long time before they'd ever see their home again, but they were excited about the future. Usopp wanted to experience real adventures, like ones he had both told to Kaya and ones his father was likely enjoying every day. He also had a hope at the back of his mind that he might one day see his father, and wondered if his father would look at him and be proud. He was going to become a brave warrior of the sea just like his dad. Kaya wanted to see the world herself. She had begun to realize just how small her world was. Kaya hadn't left her home since she was a little girl, and even before then hadn't ever gone beyond the protection of the fence surrounding the family estate. Now she was sailing off with her best friend in the world. Kaya hoped to see all this world had to offer, and to hopefully experience adventures as grand as Usopp's tales. Although Kaya couldn't help but feel nervous about the coming adventures, would she be strong enough? Or would she be holding everyone back? Usopp and Kaya turned at the sound of someone coming up the stairs to find Luffy coming to join them. Hey, so are you guys settling in okay? Luffy said, scratching the back of his head. Yeah, we're just getting used to the idea that we're headed out to sea. So far the 2 of us are doing all right, Usopp said, smiling at Kaya. Kaya, I have to say I'm surprised that you wanted to come. What made you want to become a pirate with Usopp? Luffy was interested to hear her response. He wondered what made the difference between now to make her want to come. although he had to admit he was always looking forward to more nakama. Well, to be honest, I guess there were a lot of small reasons that just added up to convince me to go. The last day with you guys has made me realize how little I've experienced on our island. But more than that, I guess I wanted to experience for myself the adventures Usopp and you guys will go on instead of waiting for Usopp to come back one day and tell me all about it. I also would have missed Usopp. I'm not sure what I'd do without him, to be honest. He has always been a great source of strength for me. At this, Kaya could feel her face flush a little bit with that small confession. Usopp himself was surprised to hear that but was glad he meant so much to Kaya. He grinned but sported a light red tint to his face as well. Then Kaya grew somber as a small frown crossed her face. I guess another reason was that I didn't want to stay in that house anymore. It was hard to not look at that house and think of Klahadore, and well, he turned out to be someone completely different. A monster that I killed. Usopp put an arm around Kaya to comfort her. Kaya, I'm sorry that you had to do what you did, but I know that it was the right thing to do even if it was a terrible decision to have to make. Kaya's smile came back a little bit. I know, but I don't think I want to have to be in that position again, which is why I have made my decision on what I can do to help make this crew strong, she said, looking up at Luffy. Oh, and what's that? Luffy asked, cocking his head to the side. I want to become a doctor. I've always wanted to learn how to help heal people, and the past day has helped me realize my dream. I don't want to hurt people if I can avoid it, but I can be proud if I help make sure everyone here is healthy and strong, she said with conviction. Luffy smiled at this. All right, sounds good to me. Luffy thought to himself, and I know just the doctor to help train you. We can always try and pick up books and supplies when we land to help you learn more skills. Yeah, that would be great. Although I did bring some stuff along from my family's library to help me get started. I have already read some of the basics like the common illnesses of the sea and treating minor wounds. That's great, Kaya. After all, if I'm going to become a great warrior of the sea, I'm going to need you to help patch my wounds, Usopp said, trying to strike a heroic pose. Usopp was also glad because he didn't want to see Kaya in harm's way. He knew that she was far from a violent person, so he was glad she wouldn't be directly fighting. Kaya, blushing a little bit, smiled back at Usopp, glad he supported her dream. Alright, well, I'm going to go talk to Nami and Zoro and make sure they're doing alright. Talk to you guys later, Luffy said, nodding goodbye. Usopp and Kaya turned back to watch the last of their old home fading into the distance, neither paying attention to the fact that they were still holding each other close. Luffy found them both in the lounge. Nami was currently going over some charts she had, likely plotting their course, and Zoro was now snoozing in a shady corner of the room. Hey, Luffy, Nami said, still looking at the charts. Zoro, with one eye open, gave a small nod of greeting. So how's everyone holding up then? Well, pretty good now that we've got the new ship. I'm looking forward to being able to sleep in my new cot, Nami said. Zoro just nodded. Good to hear. Well, alright, Nami, our next goal is to get a cook for our ship. There's a floating restaurant around this area. It's called Barady, Luffy said, and pointed out a section of the ocean on her charts. I figure once we get there and get ourselves a cook, we should make Kakoyashi Village our next destination. So you're serious about taking down Arlong, huh? Nami said, looking at him thoughtfully. Yep, I promised you in the past that I was gonna take that bastard down, and I plan on following through, Luffy said, giving her a wide toothy smile. Nami smiled at that. Thank you, Luffy. This means a lot to me. He just smiled and nodded in response. Looking out the window, he could see the last bit of sunlight dipping below the horizon. With a loud yawn, Luffy announced that he was heading to bed. His crew acknowledged this, and some weren't far behind, going to sleep themselves. Luffy, now in the men's quarters, walked to his cot and hopped in. From under his bed, he pulled out a small chest he had looted from Kuro's ship. He had replaced its previous contents with the gum fruit. He was wondering what to do with the fruit. He supposed he should keep it for now, but was wondering if any of his future crew would be able to use it. Thinking back, he couldn't imagine giving the devil fruit to any of the crew he had before. They all had their own styles, and he couldn't think of any of them that would benefit from rubber powers. He didn't think Kaya should be the one to use it either, since she didn't seem to want to be much of a fighter. So with a shrug of his shoulders, he closed the lid and stuck the chest back under his bed. After closing his eyes and bundling up, it didn't take long for the rocking of the ship and the swaying of the cot to lull him to sleep. Back on Gecko Island, a shout rung out from the crow's nest of the Navy ship. Captain, I can see the pirate ship on the north side of the island. Good. Are you able to identify the ship? The captain shouted back. No, sir. It doesn't match any pirate ships that are known to sail East Blue. All right, men. The captain addressed his crew. Land near that ship we're going aboard. Captain, permission to speak. Saluted one.